for a total of 643 manuscripts. That seems to be fairly well attested. Well, it is compared to Tacitus and his Annals or Caesar and his Gallic Wars. 643 manuscripts attest to the fact that the Iliad really was the Iliad. How does that compare with the New Testament? Well, here's the New Testament. First of all, let's go over the designation of these things. Papyri are written with an old German or Gothic P. Since most of us can't print that well, we just write a regular English P. And with a superscript, Arabic numeral. I'm sure you're familiar with it, but for those that aren't, P, 1 and so forth. P, 2. We're going to give you a rounded off figure on most of these things. And that means from the 1st to the 4th century, there are around 80. And they're just coming out, being discovered and printed and published all the time. But I'll give you a rounded off figure. We can go from around P1 to really the P81 I think I gave you, but anyway, P80. Most famous ones being the John Rylands Papyrus, 457, the Bodmer collection in the P60s and P70s, and the Chester Beatty collection in the P40s. The uncials, this would be from the 4th to the 10th century. The uncials, Arabic numerals, preceded by a 0. In other words, 01, 02, 03. The uncials, about 300. Just round it off. I've given you more specific figures earlier. About 300. We can go, in other words, from 01 up to 0300. The uncials go by other names as well. The uncials can go by just the name of the manuscript itself. For instance, what's 01? What's the name of 01? Sinaiticus. And how else can it be known? Also can be known that way. We've given you why. Various methods of designation were brought up by different men, and whenever Tischendorf, remember Tischendorf is the one who discovered some of these ancient manuscripts like this Sinaiticus, and he felt the others had already been given the English alphabet and the Greek alphabet, where it wasn't the same as the English alphabet, and you run out of letters after a while. You can only go so far in the English alphabet or the Latin alphabet and so far in the Greek alphabet, and where the two don't overlap, you still get a lot of letters, but you run out after a while. Whenever you run out, what are you going to do? Well, at one time, whenever you're back in the early stages of the discovery of manuscripts, it's okay just to give us, well, we don't have that at this time, just to give us an A, a B, a C, a D, and then we end up with a D2. You can add things in like that, and an E. That only goes so far. Once you finish that, then you go to the Greek alphabet. Once you finish that, what do? Well, you have to redevise a whole new system. Whenever Tischendorf discovered Sinaiticus, he felt it was a manuscript of such weight, and such authority that it deserves something special. So it's the only one that has the Hebrew letter that goes along with it. But the way that they're better known would be by the numbers, because we'll not run out of the numbers. In other words, Sinaiticus would be the same as Aleph. Then what's 02? Alexandrinus, which would correspond with what along here? A. See, you're one off because of your Aleph here. And someone says Vaticanus, that's 03, or you can talk about Codex B, and we're talking about Vaticanus. Then 04, you remember what 04 is? No, that's further down the line there. Anyway, it doesn't matter. You get into Ephraimi and various other ones, but it doesn't matter. Claromontanus, I think, is D2. We gave you that in this before. The minuscules would come next. The minuscules are just simply known by their Arabic numerals. To round it off, 2,700 minuscules. 2,700. So we would go 1 and then 2 and 3 up to 2,700. Minuscules. Then the lectionaries. You have to write an L, L1, L2, L3. It's supposed to be an L, not a 1. 2,000 lectionaries. 2,000 lectionaries. Then the versions, or the translations, they go by many abbreviations, which can be found in the critical apparatus of your Bibles. They go by various abbreviations. In other words, something like Italian version would be IT then, like that. Various versions in various languages. Versions, there are 9,000 manuscripts of versions. 8,000 of those being Latin. Of course, Latin was the chief one. The rest of them made up of Coptic, Sahidic, Syriac, Armenian, Georgian, and so forth, which we'll study later. 9,000 manuscripts of versions, 8,000 of those being Latin, and then finally patristic quotations. Patristic quotations, quotations in the writings of the church fathers that then would give us part of some text somewhere in the New Testament. 36,000 of those. Now, you get all those statistics together, and that's how the New Testament and its attestation, how it compares with all of these other ancient writings of ancient literature. In other words, we've got over 5,000 Greek manuscripts, over 5,000. The highest thing we gave you earlier here was the Iliad, 643 manuscripts. We have over 5,000 manuscripts of the papyri, the uncials, the minuscules, the lectionaries, not counting then versions, 9,000 of those, and patristic quotations, 36,000 of those, in order to help us put all these things together and try to reconstruct the text of the New Testament. So it just doesn't compare at all what the New Testament has as compared to what the liberals can boast for whatever their famous bedtime story might be. Now, as far as the Old Testament, we haven't said much about that. Prior to the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in the end of the 4th decade of this century, we had only a few complete Old Testament manuscripts, all of them dating from the 10th century AD or later. Now, that doesn't sound very good. That wouldn't even be good for New Testament, but the Old should be older than the New. And you just have told me that we have a portion of John's Gospel that dates 125 AD. 10th century AD or later. We had only a few complete Old Testament manuscripts. But the interesting point about that is they were of extremely, extremely good quality. We had 5,000 Greek manuscripts of the New Testament, but of much, much poorer quality. Do you remember why? What was the distinguishing factor? The Jewish scribes, they were much, much more careful in the copying of the text than the Christian scribes ever were. They were much, much more careful in their copying of it. Now, of course, the Dead Sea Scrolls have done a lot as far as excitement is concerned, because the Dead Sea Scrolls take us back, such as the copy of 1 Samuel, as early as 200 BC. Now that's moving us back 1,100 years in history. We're talking about just the end of the 4th decade of this century. Now people up until that time were a little bit concerned about the reliability of the text of the Old Testament because we didn't have good, complete manuscripts that predated the 10th century, the 900s AD. We didn't have any good manuscripts that predated that time. That's thousands of years after the time of Moses. How do we know that what Moses really wrote, or Job really wrote, is reliable? Well, whenever the discovery was made of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they compared those texts that go back 200 years BC with the medieval Jewish manuscripts from the 10th century AD, they were almost exactly the same. Obviously, there were variants. Obviously, there were mistakes that had been made. But they were so close, they were so similar, it was remarkable. Which just proved to the whole scholarly world then how reliable the Jewish scribes had been in their transmission of the text. which says a lot as far as the Old Testament is concerned, since we don't have the manuscripts available for the Old like we do with the New. In other words, it's good that we do have 5,000 Greek manuscripts, since most of them, I mean the vast majority, are of very, very poor quality. We don't have that many good, complete early ones, Sinaiticus, Vaticanus being the obvious and two most well-known early exceptions. The later ones that come after that are of very poor quality. So it's good that we have that many, so we can get them together and really compare all the variants that we have and try to end up with what the correct text is. Now, what I want to do next is look at textual theories and textual types before we get right into looking at some variants and how this affects our theory of translation. Hopefully you can see right away the potential for problems that would arise, since we're talking about days that predate the invention of the printing press and has to go from one copyist, from one scribe to another, and mistakes are going to be made. This went on for a number of years until, let's get up around the time of the King James Version of the Bible, 1611 A.D., and since it has become the most important Bible, the most famous of all Bibles, the most famous of all books that have been written, obviously a lot of people look back to it, a lot of people look up to it, a lot of people depend upon it. And the same has been true with scholars throughout the years, up until just recent times. The King James Version of the Bible, the text that it is based upon, is referred to as the TR, the Textus Receptus, which just means the received text. By that time, by 1611, we're kind of jumping right in the middle of the story. You can go back to your earlier notes and explain how I'm getting to where I am right now. We're jumping into the middle of it. By that time, the beginning of the 17th century A.D., the TR, the Textus Receptus, had become the dominant textual type as far as scholars were concerned, as far as the committees or individuals of Bible translations were concerned. In the 1800s, in the 19th century, of course, a whole series of events begins to take place. The Age of Enlightenment has just the past century, the end of just the past century, hit France. Darwin comes on the scene with his theory of evolution. Again, towards the end of the 1700s and beginning of the 1800s, critical scholarship comes up with documentary hypotheses concerning the origin of various books of the Bible. You remember the JEDP theory and the Deutero-Trito-Isianic theory, and Paul's prison epistles weren't written when it appears they were according to the New Testament, and Paul's pastoral epistles weren't written until probably around 150 A.D., middle of the 2nd century A.D. Book of Acts wasn't written until the middle of the 2nd century A.D. In other words, a whole new rise in man's thinking power to think about the Bible and to do something about that as a result. One positive thing came out of all of that. Most of that's negative. One positive thing did come out of that, and that was scholars began to question the old antiquated TR, the Textus Receptus. And in doing that, they obviously questioned the reliability of the KJV as well, since it was based upon the received text. Various men came up with various theories along the line that began to show that what people had felt concerning the TR and therefore concerning the KJV were not so reliable after all. And finally, in the end of the 1800s, two professors of divinity at Cambridge University in England, by the names, what were their names? Westcott and Hort, B.F. Westcott and F.J.A. Hort, Westcott and Hort, after 28 years of work together, in 1881 came up with a new critical edition of the Greek New Testament, plus a companion volume that meticulously explained their critical principles. They were published in 1881 and 1882 under the title The New Testament in the Original Greek. Now, their theory wasn't new. It's just the final stroke at the antiquated TR had been evidently left to these two men. Their views were built on the views of men that we had studied earlier, such as Bengel and Wettstein and Semler and Tischendorf and Tregelles and Lockman and Griesbach and all the others that we studied up prior to this time. And the influence of their work, obviously, has just been tremendous. It is what gave the final stroke against the TR, and therefore against the universal acknowledgement of the reliability of the KJV, or of the AV. And, of course, paved the way for new translations, and yes, paved the way for better modern translations. Let's briefly outline the theory of Brooke Foss Westcott and Fenton John Anthony Hort to show you what we're talking about concerning text types. They felt that the manuscripts fell into 4 family categories. Westcott and Hort felt the manuscripts fell into 4 family categories. The Western family, Alexandrian family, Syrian family, and the neutral family. Don't worry if you didn't get the last 3, just get the first one because I'm going to start with it. The Western family. The Western family contains the Greek uncials D and D2, 05 and 06, a few of the minuscules, the Old Latin version, and most of the patristic quotations from the 2nd to the 3rd centuries. The Western family. You have to draw a big picture of the Mediterranean Sea on your paper, and you can see what's west, where's Alexandria, where's Syria, and we'll say something about neutral to end with. But 4 families, in other words, in 4 localized areas, a certain text type was just perpetuated. It went on and on and on. You'd have a family. You'd have a mother-father or a mother manuscript or group of manuscripts that was important in that city, that library, that area, that scholar's resource material or something. Then other translations, other copies would be made from that. Therefore, whatever errors or variants they had, variations between that and the original text, whatever variants or variations existed there would just be perpetuated, plus new ones as well. So, in the Western family, we have these. Then we have the Alexandrian family, which is a group that to Westcott and Hort were less distinct than the Western family, the Western group, was similar, very similar to the neutral family. Their chief thought about the Alexandrian family was the reliability of this text type because of the following. The city of Alexandria, the origin of this text type, was a city that had been known for quite some time for its literary skills. This is where the Septuagint is translated, down in Egypt. It was known for its literary skills. And it was known for the reliability of its scribes as well. Therefore, probably, this was their reasoning, and of course it's proven to be true since then, probably the variants, the variations, the mistakes in the Alexandrian family would not be as serious, would not be as many, would not be as serious as you could find in the manuscripts under the Western family. They were basically changes in spelling, just stylistic changes, not important changes in the text itself. And that proved to be fairly true. They had a third family, the Syrian family. Their theory about the Syrian family briefly runs as follows. Now, books and books have been written against Westcott and Hort and written in favor of Westcott and Hort. So we're just summing it up for you. Their theory went like this. After Christianity attained official status under Constantine in the 4th century, then an attempt was made to standardize the text and to smooth out all the difficulties. That would only make sense. Since it had become the official state religion of the Roman Empire, it would only make sense that some church or religious attempt would be made to standardize the text and thus smooth out these difficulties, that is, the variants, the variations, the errors which had crept in. And this supposedly was done somewhere in Syria, perhaps at Antioch, they would say. Into this family we fit most of the minuscules, the later uncials, versions, and the late patristic quotations. Late uncials like, I have a few down here, G, H, S, V, Z. Late uncials. G, H, S, V, Z. And finally, they had this mysterious family known as the neutral family. This was a small group, smallest of the four groups, but it contained the two greatest uncials, Sinaiticus and Vaticanus, both they felt of Egyptian origin, which would put this close to the Alexandrian family, since the Alexandrian family obviously had an Egyptian origin. Now, Westcott and Hort just fell in love with Sinaiticus and Vaticanus. They felt that codices 01 and 03 had somehow escaped the corruptions of the other three groups, and thus, as closely as possible, were the ones that preserved the original text. Now, as far as we're concerned, the papyri and the uncials are the two most important groups for reconstructing the text. The papyri and the uncials, that is the early uncials. We're talking about, 250 A.D., somewhere around in there for date of Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. Those are early. Those are our earliest uncials there. Papyri, of course, can go 125 years earlier than this. So our papyri and our uncials are our most important groups or manuscripts as far as finding out what the text was. Now, we went over the history earlier, so I won't do it again, of the ruckus and the uproar that the Westcott and Hort theory caused. Everybody blamed them, liberal scholars here, higher school of criticism, taking away the Holy Scriptures, taking away the KJV version from us, giving us these unreliable manuscripts, unreliable versions, and there was quite a stir over that at the end of last century, the beginning of this century. Slowly, however, the truth dawned on the scholarly world. It's never reached the lay people, not to this day. They still hold to the KJV, but it did reach the scholarly world, and revisions were made because in the last 100-plus years, since that time to now, more things have been learned. More things have been discovered. Lots of things have been learned and discovered in the last 100 years. So people who call us followers of Westcott and Hort really are not giving us the proper benefit of the doubt, because in no sense of the word do we follow the old, antiquated Westcott and Hort theory now, because it's been outdated, outdone by some further studies. Presently today, here's where we sit as far as text families are concerned. We have the Alexandrian family, which really should be combined with the so-called neutral of Westcott and Hort. And this is our most valuable family of all, the Alexandrian family. We have our Caesarean family. This is the most significant change between the Westcott and Hort theory and where textual criticism stands today. The Caesarea, the Caesarean family. This was unknown to Westcott and Hort. It was first named by B.H. Streeter in his blot-busting book, The Four Gospels, in 1924. And it lies somewhere between number 1 and number 3. Alexandrian, and in the third place, the Western family. This seems now to be the most mysterious of the groups, seems to have a very early origin. Exactly where, the scholars aren't for sure. And fourthly, the Byzantine family. The Byzantine family. It's the same as Westcott and Hort's, basically the same as Westcott and Hort's Syrian family. But the name was changed from Syrian to Byzantine to avoid confusion between the Byzantine text type, the Syrian text type, and the Syriac version. There's a Syriac version of the Bible with very complicated history behind it that we will start discussing whenever we get through with our theory of translation here. The Byzantine text. And I've given them to you in the order of their importance, or we could say the order of their reliability. Alexandrian, Caesarean, Western, Byzantine. Byzantine is filled with various examples we're going to discuss here in a moment, such as harmonization, conflation, homoiotolutin, ditography, haplography, where they smooth out rough things in the text. And of course, the Old Byzantine is similar to the TR, which makes it the origin for the KJV, which tells us why the KJV is not reliable. Let me say a comment, though, about the TR and the Byzantine. They're not equivalent. You can't use the terms as synonyms for one another. The Byzantine text type and the Textus Receptus. The Textus Receptus was based on, and you can't reverse this, the Textus Receptus was based on the Byzantine text type. But you see, the Byzantine text type itself doesn't always stay consistent. None of the groups really stay consistent. The received text doesn't always stay consistently based upon a Byzantine text either, which is interesting. They're similar because one is founded on the other, one is the basis for the other, but they're not equivalent, they're not equal, they're not synonymous. The text doesn't always stay consistently based upon a Byzantine text either, which is interesting. They're similar because one is founded on the other, one is the basis for the other, but they're not equivalent, they're not equal, they're not synonymous. But rather, the Byzantine text type comes first, the received text is based upon that, and then the KJV, the English translation, is taken from the Greek TR, the Greek received text, Textus Receptus, and we end up with our King James Version today. Since the time of Westcott and Hort, scholars have realized the Byzantine text type is the least reliable of the four families of manuscripts. And therefore, if you're going to translate a Bible, don't depend on the Byzantine text type. Back in the KJV days, you see, not a lot was known. Sinaiticus was really not known then. Hadn't been discovered. Vaticanus had been discovered, but Vaticanus was not really available to them. It was a Catholic manuscript locked up in the Vatican. They didn't have the influence of that. All of these papyri manuscripts that we have now, the John Rylands papyri, the Bodmer collection, the Chester Beatty collection, that didn't exist for the KJV translators. So you can't be too harsh on them saying they gave us a deceptive text here, a deceptive translation, because they didn't have available what we have today. But the problem is, now that we have available what we have today, and why be satisfied with something so inferior as the Byzantine text and the Textus Receptus and the King James Version of the Bible? That's why most of your translations in English today will be based on something besides the Textus Receptus or Byzantine text manuscript. Now, there are a few oddities in the scholarly world today. Zane Hodges, professor of theology down at Dallas Seminary, is one of them, who just adamantly refuses to believe Westcott and Hort and adamantly is in favor of the old Byzantine text. And there are others, David Otis Fuller, Wilbur Pickering in his book, The Identity of the New Testament Text. But there's a new Greek Bible out by Zane Hodges that gives us the Textus Receptus as the reliable text from which translation should be made. Of course, we're not going to go into lots of trying to prove something wrong or something against that. We've already done that earlier, just reviewing a little information here. That brings us into the present status of Greek text today. We got all these manuscripts, and whenever you're going to give us a Greek Bible, you have to go to all these manuscripts, the papyri, the uncials, the minuscules, the versions, the lectionaries, the patristic quotations, and try to give us something as reliable as possible, as close as possible to what you think the original text was. Presently, there are two Greek Bibles that are well known today. The first of those is the old Nestle Greek New Testament. Nestle, Nestle, about like it sounds. Ever since around the 1950s, it's been referred to as the Nestle-Aland, A-L-A-N-D, New Testament, and the United Bible Society's Greek New Testament. Tonight's probably as good a night as any to give you a little history of these two Greek versions, these two Greek Bibles. And so once we've said it, it'll be on tape, and we want to say it again. Let's give a little history, first of all, of Nessel's Greek Testament. Eberhard Nessel was a German professor and textual critic in the end of last century. If my memory serves me correctly, his dates are from 1851 to 1913. Now, his earliest and his chief concern in his textual studies was the Septuagint. Nessel did a lot of work on the text of the Septuagint in his earlier days. Whenever he accepted his final post at a new university in 1898, he brought out, because he'd been working the last few years on the Greek New Testament, he brought out the first of the famous editions of Eberhard Nessel. A Greek Bible, 1898, simply entitled in the English, the Greek New Testament. Now, he was sponsored by the German Bible Society. This ties in now to what we said earlier. Remember about Bible societies? The Württemberg Bible Society, the German Bible Society. And I'm sure neither they nor he knew what they were getting into or what a benefit they were giving the world. Now, 1898, notice your dates here. Westcott and Hort just published their volumes in 1881, 1882. So at this time, the Textus Receptus is still the received text. It still has claim in a wide range of people, as well as universities, as well as geography is concerned. Nessel's first edition, many editions since then, over a score of editions, over 24 editions since then. The first one was a little stiff and a little wooden. He based his views on three earlier men, Tischendorf, Tregelles, and Westcott and Hort, and their theory. He basically took what they had, found out where they agreed on something, made that his text, and then where they didn't agree, came up with something on his own. Tischendorf, Tregelles, and Westcott and Hort. By the year 1904, enough interest had been stirred in this new Greek Bible. See, there were Greek Bibles available. Tischendorf, Tregelles, Weiss, Griesbach, all of these guys had written Greek Bibles before. So this was nothing new as far as writing a Greek Bible was concerned. But he had really put a lot of time into it, and it just came on the scene of history at the right time, following 20 years later almost, the heels of the Westcott and Hort theory. In other words, the scholarly world was ripe and ready for a new Greek Bible. In 1904, it was picked up by the British and Foreign Bible Society. And in this fourth edition, up until that time, the British and Foreign Bible Society had based all of their Bibles, and therefore all translations that were scattered all over the world in different languages, based upon the Textus Receptus. They changed that in 1904 with the fourth edition of Nessel's New Testament. And it was a major accomplishment. I don't have Nessel's earliest one, his 1898, but I do have the fourth edition, the first one that was put out by the British and Foreign Bible Society, 1904, and of course that was in celebration of 100 years of existence for them. They had been founded in 1804. So here's, be careful, it's an old one, but there's the old Nessel. That's the fourth edition from 1904. Going along in the history, take your time to look at it because it's an interesting little book. And notice, as it's passed around, take a look at the critical apparatus, and then we'll say more about that later on. I do have some comments I want to make about the CA, but take a look at Nessel's early critical apparatus. The 13th edition was published in 1927. We're just looking at the important ones here. The 13th edition was published in 1927, and it was at this time that the CA, the critical apparatus, was drastically changed and given really the modern look, as you'll find it in the 26th or 25th edition today. So the 13th edition was important because of the introduction of new points in the CA. New points as far as what? Well, manuscripts, versions, patristic quotations. You won't find that as you look in that CA. He basically took whatever had been found in Tischendorf, Tregelles, and Westcott and Hort and put it in his CA. But now he's really adding a very large amount of information to the apparatus, so almost so that students of the Greek New Testament then could read the apparatus and make up their own mind, form their own judgment about which of the variants is the one that should fit in this place. Rather than just giving us something, in the text, he gave us a CA. He had something in the text, but he gave the CA with the variants so you could make up your own mind as you looked over that. The 21st edition came out in 1952, and it was at this time that Kurt Aland, another German professor, Kurt Aland, first became associated with Nessel's work. 1952, the 21st edition. Now, Aland probably is he definitely is one of the world's leading authorities on variants in the Greek text, particularly as it applies to the papyri. Aland had done extensive research in the newly discovered papyri, and so he has much more to add that Eberhard Nessel never did add in his earlier days. By the way, Nessel's son Erwin took over in between these two, but Erwin Nessel I don't think is remembered as well as much as his father or as Kurt Aland, who came after that. The 25th edition was printed in 1963. And you can see from the one going around right now, we're talking about little pocket editions, ones that are easy to carry. And that probably is what has made Nessel-Aland New Testament the most used, most universal Greek New Testament that exists on the earth today. And it has all the reasons for being so widely acclaimed and so widely used, because it is very, very reliable. However, around this time, a new work begins in 1955. Now we're going to have to weave the story together with the UBS edition. This may sound just way out in left field as far as technicalities are concerned, but one day you'll appreciate it when you know something about these two Greek Bibles. 1955, a commission was set up of 3 Bible societies in Europe, I believe. 3 Bible societies set up a commission to start working on a new Greek Testament. This was in addition to the Nessel-Aland Greek Testament going on at this time, whereas Aland had just been working on this now for 3 years. Those 3 societies were the Netherlands Bible Society, the British and Foreign Bible Society. Those were 2 added. I'm sorry, let me give you the original 3. The American Bible Society, keep those 2. The American Bible Society, the Scottish Bible Society, and that in Germany. And then they were later joined by these other 2. 5 Bible societies from America, from Scotland, from Germany, from the Netherlands, and from England, which made up the United Bible Society. United because these 5 countries and their Bible societies united, joined together. And an international interdenominational committee of textual scholars was appointed in 1955 to start work on a new Greek Testament. 1955. At the same time this is going on, though, remember Nessel-Aland, more editions of Nessel-Aland are coming out. The first edition of UBS, United Bible Societies, then was finally published with the help of Kurt Aland in 1966. 1966. A second edition came out in 1968. The changes weren't too dramatic, except in the rating system, which I'll explain here in a moment. That probably was the biggest change between the 66 and 68 edition. And then the whole time they're planning. You see, as one comes out, then new light is discovered. New light comes to the forefront for old manuscripts now that have popped up. So the whole time they're trying to get a new edition of UBS out, and a lot of snags enter into the picture. And it doesn't finally come out until 1975. 1975, the third edition of UBS, United Bible Society, Greek Testament is printed. And then to keep all your dates straight, 4 years later, the 26th edition of Nestle-Aland came out. The 26th edition of Nestle-Aland. So we're on the 26th of Nestle-Aland and the 3rd of UBS. Now, Kurt Aland really had been, as far as I'm concerned, I think as far as the evidence is concerned, Kurt Aland had been the unifying force, the chief individual, the chief man as far as his research was concerned, behind both of the Testaments. He was working on Nestle, that became Nestle-Aland because of his work. He was one of the 4 chief men working on the UBS as well. That can only mean that these 2 Greek Bibles are either going to end up identical to one another or very, very similar. As a matter of fact, the text did end up being identical. There was a difference in the paragraphs, punctuation, things like that, but the Greek text as such did end up identical. That gave a problem then to the committees working on Nestle-Aland, the committees working on UBS. Why continue both of these lines, both of these strands, since we're ending up with the same thing? We've got to get these together in every sense of the word, the orthography, the paragraphing, the punctuation, and all. So a third corrected edition of UBS came out just recently in 1983. 1983, which is supposed to be identical in its text to Nestle-Aland 26. However, there still remains to this day a big difference between the 2 Bibles, not in the text but in the CA. And one's preference of Nestle-Aland over UBS third corrected really breaks down to one issue here, and that is the use of the CA. The text, we find, is going to be exactly the same. I'll pass around Nestle-Aland 26th edition, and primarily as you turn through it, notice the CA. I know it's kind of difficult to listen to me talk and then pass this around, and then it's all going to be written in Greek, and try to understand what I'm talking about. But notice somewhere as you turn through there in Nestle-Aland's 26, notice the CA at the bottom. There's no doubt about the fact that Nestle-Aland's 26th edition is the most widely used in seminaries and colleges and Bible translation societies and groups today. It's the most widely used Greek Bible in the world. My preference is back to the UBS, maybe for 2 reasons. One is maybe for a sentimental reason, because I was started out on the first edition, the 1966 edition of UBS, which is this little book, which I'll pass around. You can compare and contrast the CA here with the other one that will be coming ahead of it. Here's the original, the first one. There's been 3 now of UBS. 1966 was the first, 68 was next, 75 was next, and then in 83 the third corrected edition came out. This is the first edition. That's not as reliable, obviously, as the editions that came after that. Not as reliable. First of all, maybe for sentimental reasons, I think chiefly, though, because of the CA. The CA, the critical apparatus in the UBS third corrected, has a rating system of A, B, C, and D. A, obviously, meaning that the variant that is given, as far as they are concerned, is almost totally reliable. There's almost no question about it. B, there's a little bit of question. C, there's more doubt. If you've got a variant that has a D by it, there's just really no way they can tell whether what they have given you up here in the top of the page in the text is the best variant, the one probably that's representative of the original autographs, or the one down at the bottom of the page. It comes out in a little bigger edition because mine has more to it, but here's what the UBS third corrected from 1983 looks like. Of course, as far as I'm concerned, just like you have a Hebrew Bible, which is indispensable for a true study of the Old Testament, a UBS third corrected or Nestle-Aland 26 is indispensable as far as the study of the Greek New Testament is concerned. And there's probably a third reason why I would recommend the UBS to anyone, the UBS third corrected edition. I would recommend that over Nestle-Aland. That's because Bruce Metzger, who was part of the committee for the UBS Third, put out a textual commentary on the Greek New Testament that is based upon UBS Third. As a matter of fact, it really came out a little early because there were so many snags with UBS. I think this came out in 71. Yes, Metzger's, it's entitled A Textual Commentary of the Greek New Testament. Came out in 71, but then I have the corrected edition, the corrected one to 1975, which gets it in line with the third edition of UBS. This will give you every variant that appears, plus I think 600, in UBS Third, with the evidence that's given in UBS Third, and with the rating system, A, B, C, D, but more than that, with the reasons behind the committee's decision to accept one variant over another. In other words, if you read the CA of UBS Third down at the bottom, they'll give you, if we're talking about a variant, then they'll give you what they feel to be the correct variant in the text. Then down at the bottom of the page, they'll give you one of the possibilities, maybe two or three of the possibilities, and they'll rate those as A, B, C, D. What do we feel like? Which do we feel like is the more reliable of the two? After that, they'll give you the papyri, they'll give you the uncials, they'll give you the minuscules, they'll give you the versions, and they'll give you the patristic quotations. Those 6 things that we've been discussing this evening. They don't tell us why, what really made them. I mean, just all that evidence is one thing, but what was the logic that went into the minds and the discussion, heated discussion, Metzger tells us, the discussion among the committee members, what went through their minds as to why they gave us the variant that they did. That's set forth here in Metzger's textual commentary. As far as I'm concerned, it's totally indispensable. You really can't read the UBS Third corrected, understandably, without having Metzger's textual commentary to go along with it. I want to point out something I mentioned here earlier, I think in the previous message, where I said that all the mistakes were made because in the ancient manuscripts because it was done by hand, no printing press. Well, I hardly got Metzger's book here, and I find a major mistake. Knowing me, I find the mistakes here. The top of the page, it says textual commentary over here on my right and your left. Over here on the left side, it'll give you the book, the letter to the Galatians. Textual commentary here, the book over here. Until you get to 1 John. And then it gives you the book over here, and it says textual commentary over here. And it's all through 1 John. It's a printing mistake. It's a mistake there. So you can't even correct the mistakes here in the printed book. Take it and read through it. It's very fascinating. I couldn't do without the little book. Okay, we're through with Greek Bibles then. That is with UBS Third corrected, 1983. This is Metzger's textual commentary, 1971, corrected edition 1975, which correlates with the third edition of UBS, 1975. Now that you just know all of that, you're going to go tell your parents about it afterwards or lecture your children on that topic. In other words, if you don't remember any of that, UBS Third Corrected Edition is a Greek Bible to have if you want to be a part of the church. And have Metzger's commentary if you really want to understand your UBS Third. Okay, let's get into variants again then. We're talking about accuracy of the underlying text is the first step in giving us a reliable translation. Variants. You know what a variant is? Okay, we won't go into that. Rules for accepting the variants. We're only going to give you, I think I'll give you 3, but we'll go over the 2 chief ones. A variant, I always say I won't explain it. A variant is when we have John 1:18 and in manuscript A gives us, let's just say, I'm not making these 2 variants up, I'm just making this up. Gives us God, and manuscript B gives us Son. Those are 2 variants. By the way, remember how many variants are there in the New Testament? 200,000. 200,000. You think you're going to get that many in Metzger? I think UBS gives you something like 1,200 or 1,400 pairs of variants. And then I think Metzger's commentary adds 6 more that he felt that were necessary to discuss. What's that, 3,000 or so? 3,000 variants, that's all. There are 200,000 of them. But I mean the vast slug of them, like 80-90%, are just one little spelling one way or the other that doesn't make any difference at all, or even punctuation involved or something, or maybe abbreviation. Remember we gave you the important nomina sacra, the words that are commonly abbreviated in the early Greek manuscripts. We won't go over that again. Variations like that. So here we're talking about John 1:18. One manuscript will give you God, one will give you Son. We're talking about 2 variants. Which one is correct? How do you know which one is correct? See, manuscript A and C, D, and E give God, and B and X, Y, and Z give Son. Well, so what? I mean, you can't just say, oh, I've got 4 manuscripts against your 3 manuscripts, I win. It doesn't work like that. How do we know how to choose the correct variant? The 2 most important rules. Accept the more difficult of the 2. You remember that rule?
Yeah.
Accept the more difficult of the 2. Why? Why accept the more difficult of the 2? They're going to try to make it easier for us, obviously. If a scribe came across something difficult like John 1:18, no man has seen God at any time, the only begotten God that's in the bosom of the Father, he hath declared him. Only begotten God? That doesn't sound right. Only begotten Son.
This message will be continued on the following tape.